Welcome back to my channel, Bookworms. So this video is going to tell you all about the 13 books that have been published this year that I've enjoyed reading. So currently, while I'm filming this, I have read over 32 new releases from this year, and these are the top 13 in my opinion that I find are going to be new favourites or just favourites of this year. The first book that I want to tell you about that is probably like my most favourite release, and that is The Haunting of Alejandra by Fee Castro. This one was incredible. This is a story about a woman who is facing certain haunts in her life. She's struggling currently in her life as a mom and wife, and then also dealing with a lot of generational trauma, so to speak. This one made me feel so many emotions reading this. I love the writing style. It was so like lyrical, and also the pacing in this book was incredible. I did almost cry at the end. I'm not sure why that is, but this one has a hook in me and I thoroughly enjoyed this. It was incredible, and I think it's going to be like a favourite of this year. Moving on from that to one that I read at the very start of this year, and that is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. So this one was just fun. Whenever I want something that is kind of more queer, more comedic based, I go to Grady Hendrix. He writes such an incredible way that doesn't feel like it's horror and you're just having a good time. So this story for me was incredible. It kind of starts off very odd, where we're facing grief and our main character is dealing with the loss of their parents. And then the second half kind of goes a bit nuts. And I feel like that's where I enjoyed it the most. This is a weird story about puppets and how siblings have to band together to sell their haunted house. So this one was great. I loved reading this. And yeah, like I said, it's just a fun read for me. I love Grady Hendrix. I definitely loved this new release. Next up, we have Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. So this story for me was an anticipated release for the second half of the year, and I love this. It was such a great read. It is an adult book, but it's written like a YA story. So that kind of for me was a bit of a struggle to get into at first, but the overall story was great. I really loved it. So essentially we follow Rose Darling, who discovers that she's puking up flies and tries to figure out her connection to this Camp Damascus, which is a gay conversion camp that has a 100% succession rate. It was a weird book, but weird in such a good way. I really loved all of the supernatural elements in here. I just wish that the writing felt more of her age, in terms of like dialogue and stuff like that. But overall, the story was great, and it was a good story for me to read during the summer. So next up is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. This is my first Cosby book, and it was incredible. Of course, it wouldn't be in this list if it wasn't, but for me, it was the social commentary that it dealt with throughout the book. There were so many elements to this, and of course it is it's a thriller book. It was so good and a quick read for me, especially as an ebook, which is the format that I read it in. I don't usually read ebooks very quickly, but this one had a hook in me again, and really loved reading this during the summer. This story follows this black sheriff whilst he has to deal with a recent shooting in a school, and kind of the story develops from there, and he's investigating the whole thing to help this town kind of become safe again. The next one is another ebook that I read, and that is That Night in the Woods by Christopher Triana. and it was great. I loved it. It was so different from his previous book that I read. It was less extreme. It followed a group of friends who get together again after the death of one of the members of the friend group. They all have to go back out into the woods. So it's a dual timeline based story. We jump between time and also between characters in that time, but it's such a good read. I really love the story. My review I will link above or in the cards if you want to go check that out. The next one is the Cotton Candy Massacre Part 2. So this is the sequel to the Cotton Candy Massacre. The Cotton Candy Massacre was my favourite book that I read in April, and I wanted to check out his second book because it was getting released in August of this year. So yeah, picked it up and loved it. It was incredible. This one I feel is more graphic, and the main character that we are following is one of my favorites from the first book, so that was really good. I loved seeing how this character was developed throughout this story, which is Stacy. Stacy got turned in the first book, and now she is a killer kid clown, and we kind of follow it from there. And instead of being at Bunkin's Bonanza, we are at Franklin's Fun Castle. So it's a really good read. It's much shorter than the first book, which I kind of liked, especially as this was more graphic in like the kills and subject themes. So really loved this book, and actually can't wait to see the third installment. So next up is a controversial book, and that is Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. So for me, this one I enjoyed reading. It was mind bending, just like a lot of her books. This one a lot of people don't actually enjoy because of how twisted it actually is and how difficult it is to follow along. So Sky steals a story from Wilder, and he is trying to get his revenge by rewriting his own story. So yeah, it is a twisty book that is based around writing, and lots of twists and turns in this one. It was interesting to read this. I read this for a tandem read along, and it was so interesting to see other people's opinions of this during that time. Loads of people were getting really confused with the story. Once we have the twist, then it kind of made sense. So I loved reading this. I enjoy books that make me think and hurt my head. So I really enjoyed reading this book. So next up is another book that was released in the early half of the year, and that is Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones. This is an author that is an automatic buy for me. Not a lot of people enjoy this one, but I feel like it was necessary, and it's good to get a different view on the story. Obviously this is a different killer, but yeah, like the first story we kind of just followed Jade and her inner monologue, and this story we didn't get a lot of that. We had a lot more kills and descriptions and all of that good stuff. So this one was a good read for me. I'm really looking forward to the third book. Next up is The Nightmare Man by J.H. Murcutt. So this one for me was an anticipated release again. It follows a writer who goes back to their hometown to write their story, but then finds out that a killer is mimicking the kills that is in his book, which has yet to be published. So it's kind of interesting that for me, when I was reading this, I was comparing it to the episode in Supernatural, which I think is called The Scarecrow. So technically, like, this scarecrow comes alive and starts killing people. It felt like an autumn book. It had all of those atmospheric autumn vibes, and it had all of the creep elements too. So it was definitely an interesting read. I would like to read it physically at some point. I did read it as an audiobook, but I'd like to try it again and compare it through reading this time. Another one is Mosaic. So this one is a short book that follows a girl who is contracted to fix a stained glass window of an old abandoned church. So it's quite interesting. It wasn't something that I was going to originally read, but I saw it and it's kind of, the cover screamed to me and I was like, okay, I'll just read it and see what it's like. It's very interesting. I enjoyed reading it. It got a bit creepy, of course, because it's a horror book, but I would say that this is very much a young adult read, which is why it's not all that high on my list. But yeah, it was an interesting read, lots of twists and turns in here, and I would say though that the pacing was a bit off, but that's the only thing that was really wrong with it. So next up we have A Light Most Hateful by Hailey Piper. This is like a queer Stranger Things sort of story. This follows Olivia, who is a runaway from home, living in a new town, working, living and trying to survive basically, and then having to come to terms with finding out some devastating information, especially after a storm hits and everything goes to shit basically. So this one was interesting. It screams like supernatural sci-fi, which I really enjoyed. It was a fun read and definitely worth the time. And the overall plot was actually interesting. I loved the outcome, so yeah, you might want to check this out too. The final book that I want to tell you about is Mayfly by CJ Cleed. This one was so good. It is a disturbing read that follows a Disney princess by day, killer by night. And I don't need to tell you much more because that's great in itself. Love this book. It was a great read and you should read it too. So there you have it. Those are my favorite books from 2023 so far. Let me know in the comments which ones you've read, if you agree with me, if they are ones you like, or let me know in the comments which book you've enjoyed reading this year. I would love to know. So until next time, keep your pages turning and embrace the darkness. Bye!